The sky over Montana was the color of a fresh bruise, purple and black and sick yellow. The rain did not fall. It struck. It came in horizontal sheets, driven by a wind that sounded like a mourning woman, slamming against the canvas cover of the small wagon with the force of thrown gravel. Miriam gripped the leather reins, her knuckles white stones against the dark, wet leather. The wagon was dying. It was tilted at a terrible angle, the left rear wheel swallowed by a sucking, churning mud that had once been a trail. The single mule hitched to the trace's braid, a high-pitched sound of pure terror, its eyes rolling white as it fought the weight. Every heave the animal gave only served to drag the wagon closer to the edge. 10 feet to her left, the trail simply ceased to exist. It had crumbled away into a roaring, muddy torrent at the bottom of a new gulch. The world smelled of ozone, wet pine, and primal fear. "Hush, Jacob," Miriam whispered, her voice stolen by the wind. The mule strained again. The wagon groaned, a sound of splintering wood. From inside the canvas-covered bed came a cough. It was not a healthy, clearing cough. It was a dry, thin rasp, like paper tearing. "It is all right, Lydia," Miriam called back, forcing a strength into her voice that she had not felt in a year. "Just a little stuck. We will be moving soon." Lydia did not answer. She had not truly answered in 2 days. Miriam climbed down, her boots sinking instantly to the ankle. The mud was a cold, greedy thing, pulling at her. She was a small woman, made smaller by the oversized oilskin coat she wore, but her face was set in a hard, desperate line. She grabbed a spoke of the sinking wheel and pulled. It was like trying to pull a nail from petrified wood. It did not budge. She was alone. She had been alone since... She pushed the thought away. She was alone. Her sister was dying. And the wagon, containing the last of their food and medicine, was about to be swallowed by the earth. She saw him first as a shadow, a place in the churning trees where the rain seemed to fall thicker. A shape detached itself from the deep black of the pines. A man. He was leading a horse, or perhaps the horse was leaning on him. It was hard to tell. Both man and beast were caked in mud, moving with a shared, agonizing limp. Miriam's hand flew from the wheel and disappeared under the oilskin. Closing around the cold wooden stock of the shotgun she kept wedged beside the driver's seat, he stopped 20 feet away, a distance that felt both too far and too close. He was tall, but stooped with exhaustion. Rain plastered dark hair to his skull. He raised a hand, palm out, a gesture that was meant to be peaceful but only looked like weary surrender. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice a low gravel that barely carried over the storm. "You are in a bad way." She said nothing. She just watched him. He was a threat. Every man she had met in the last 6 months who was not her husband, and especially the one who was her husband, had been a threat. He looked at the wagon, at the frantic mule, at the crumbling precipice. He seemed to take it all in with a single, slow glance. His horse, a gaunt bay with a bleeding hock, lowered its head and groaned. "You cannot stay there," he said, taking a half-step closer. "That bank is fixin' to go." "Stay back," Miriam commanded. Her voice was sharp, and it surprised even her. The man stopped. He nodded, as if he had expected it. "I mean no harm, but you will lose your rig, and whatever is in it." As if summoned, Lydia coughed again. This time. It ended in a weak, breathless sob. The man's expression changed. The weariness remained. But something else sharpened in his eyes. He looked past Miriam, at the canvas. "You got a child in there?" "My sister," Miriam said, her teeth clenched. "She is sick." It was not a question. He took another step. Miriam pulled the shotgun halfway out. It was heavy, slick with rain. "I can help," he said. "That mule is spent. You need weight behind the wheel. We push. You drive him. We might save it." "Why?" she asked, the suspicion raw in her throat. "What do you want?" He almost smiled, a grim twitch of his lips. "Ma'am, I want a dry place and a fire, same as you, right now. I will settle for not watching you and your sister get buried in mud." He gestured to his own shirt. to a dark stain on his side that was not mud. "I am hurt. My horse is played out. I am not looking for trouble. I'm just done." Miriam looked at him. He was wounded. He was exhausted. He was, perhaps, too weak to be a danger. But Lydia's breathing was growing shallow. She made the calculation. The man or the storm, the wolf she could see, or the one she could not. She shoved the shotgun back into its slot, though she did not take her hand from it. "If you touch her, I will kill you." He nodded again, a slow, tired acceptance of terms. "Fair." He limped to the back of the wagon. Sinking deep into the mire, he put his good shoulder to the wood. "Get on the traces. Hit the mule when I say—" Miriam scrambled back onto the seat, grabbing the reins. "Now, Jacob, here, now!" the man roared, his voice suddenly powerful. Miriam cracked the reins. The mule lunged. The man heaved. The wagon groaned. Metal shrieked against wood. And the wheel turned. It lifted an inch, sucking mud. Then two. "Again!" he shouted. "Hiya!" Miriam cried. Striking the mule's rump, the wagon lurched. It slid 6 inches forward, away from the collapsing edge, but it settled deeper. The mud was a morass, a living thing that would not let go. "It is not enough!" Miriam screamed, half sobbing in frustration. "It is sinking. Keep pushing. Don't let go!" She cried out, though she was not sure if she was talking to the man, the mule, or herself. The man repositioned, bracing his feet against a submerged rock. He set his jaw. The muscles in his neck stood out like ropes. "One more time," he yelled, his voice strained. "Give it everything. Hiya!" He threw his entire body into the effort. Miriam heard his grunt, a sound of pure, agonizing effort. The wagon shivered. The wheel spun, found purchase for a heart-stopping second, and the entire rig lunged forward, landing on slightly firmer ground. The mule stumbled, catching its footing. The wagon was safe. Miriam gasped, her lungs burning. She turned to thank the man. He was gone. She looked down and saw him. He was face down in the mud, unmoving. He had not collapsed. He had simply emptied. His strength was gone, and he had fallen where he stood. He was alive. She knew because when she grabbed his shoulder to roll him over, a low moan escaped him. He was burning with fever. The rain was washing the mud from his shirt, revealing the true state of the wound on his side. It was a ragged tear, ugly and inflamed. Lydia was her blood. This man was a stranger, but he had saved them. "Lord, help me," Miriam whispered. She could not leave him here. She could not take him. Then he lifted his head, barely an inch. His eyes were slitted, clouded with pain. "Shack!" he rasped, pointing a muddy finger toward a break in the trees she had not noticed. "Old. Assay office. Roof." She saw it, a darker square against the gray, maybe 200 yards up a slight incline. It took an hour of hell. She got Lydia out of the wagon first, wrapped in every dry blanket she possessed. She carried her sister, whose weight was frighteningly small, and set her down on the dry patch of pine needles inside the abandoned shack. Then she went back for the man. He was trying to stand, using his broken horse as a car-com. "Go!" "Leave me," he muttered, but his words were slurred. "You cannot walk," she said. "Have to." "You will not make it. Get on your horse. He is lame, cannot carry me." "Then you will lean on me," she said, and the resolve in her voice allowed no argument. He draped a heavy arm over her shoulders. She took most of his weight. He was a big man, and she was small. They moved one step at a time. He dragged his wounded leg. She half carried, half dragged him, her boots slipping, her own muscles screaming. Every step was a new agony. By the time they reached the shack, she was trembling so badly she could hardly stand. She dumped him unceremoniously onto the dirt floor, just inside the doorway. The shack was not much. It was 12 feet square, built of rough-hewn planks. The roof was mostly intact, but water dripped in 3 different places, forming dark puddles on the floor. A rusted, pot-bellied stove stood cold in one corner. In the other, a simple wooden bunk was built into the wall, covered in old rat droppings and rotted canvas. But it was out of the wind. Miriam cleaned the bunk as best she could, laid out her bedroll, and settled Lydia onto it. She covered her with the oilskin coat. Then she turned to the man. He was shivering violently, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. He was as sick as her sister, with a sigh that felt like it tore something loose in her chest. Miriam went to work. She built a fire in the rusted stove. Using the dry kindling the man had carried in his saddle pack and some broken bits of furniture from the corner. Smoke filled the small room before it found the chimney, but with the smoke came warmth. She stripped off his wet, muddy shirt, and she stopped. His skin was a map of a hard life. A long, puckered scar ran along his ribs, white and old. Newer, darker bruises covered his torso, and there was the ink, tattoos, a coiled snake on his forearm. A woman's name, badly done, crossed out with thick black lines. On his shoulder, a strange symbol, like a brand, but done with a needle. They were the marks of a man who had spent time in places decent folk only whispered about. She cleaned the wound on his side. It was worse than she thought. It was deep, and there was powder burn around the edges. A gunshot. Recent. She did what she could. She washed it with the last of their good water and packed it with a poultice of yarrow she kept for Lydia. She bandaged it tightly with strips torn from her own petticoat. He drifted in and out of consciousness. In his fever, he spoke. His name was Eli. He spoke of dust, of cattle, of a boss named Stark. He was in a saloon. Miles City. The air was thick with smoke. Eli was saying he did not do it. He drew first. Stark. You know he did. Eli saw the 3 bodies on the floor. He saw Stark's men, the ones who had really done the shooting, holstering their irons. He heard Stark's voice, cold as a banker's heart. You were always too fast for your own good, Eli, and too slow to learn your place. You are a problem, and this solves it. He remembered the feeling of being framed, the gut-shot surprise of it. He had worked for Stark's syndicate for 5 years, pushing cattle, branding calves, doing the hard work. He had fought off rustlers. He had taken a bullet for Stark's son. And for what? To be the scapegoat when Stark's hired guns got drunk and shot up a card game. 3 men dead, the dream Stark said. And you are the only one left holding a smoking gun. Looks bad. Eli. He remembered the escape. The bounty poster. $500. Dead or alive. He remembered running. He woke with a gasp. Miriam was there, holding a tin cup of water to his lips. Her face was pale in the firelight, her eyes enormous and dark. Who is Stark? She asked, her voice flat. Eli stared at her. He tried to sit up, but the pain in his side exploded, and he fell back with a groan. Does not matter. You are wanted. She said it was a statement. That depends on who is asking. He rasped. You were shot. Argument with a fella. He lost. And you have been running? Eli looked at her. He saw the hard line of her mouth. He saw the suspicion in her eyes, but he also saw that she had bandaged him. She had saved him from the fever. Looks like I stopped running, he said. Miriam did not reply. She turned away from him and went to her sister. She sat on the edge of the bunk, dipping a cloth in a bowl of water and laying it on Lydia's forehead. Eli watched her. He saw her hands, raw and chapped from the rains. And as the firelight caught her left hand, he saw the ring. It was a plain gold band, but it was not worn with love. It was pressed deep into her finger, indented, as if it had been hammered there, a mark of ownership she could not shed. And above it, on her wrist, peeking out from the cuff of her flannel shirt, he saw the faint, yellow-purple shadow of an old bruise, a bruise in the precise shape of a man's fingers. He said nothing. She said nothing. The only sounds in the tiny shack were the whistle of the wind, the steady drip, drip, drip of the leaking roof, and the terrible, shallow breaths of the sick girl. They were trapped. The storm raged for 2 more days. The world was reduced to the 4 wet walls of the shack. They existed in a tense, gray bubble. Miriam tended to both of them. She was efficient, quiet, and distant. She rationed the last of their jerky and hardtack. She melted snow for water. She never slept, or so it seemed to Eli. Every time he opened his eyes, she was either staring into the fire or checking on Lydia. Eli's fever broke on the second night. He woke to find himself clear-headed, though weak as a newborn colt. The pain in his side was a dull, hot fire. Lydia, however, was worse. Her fever raged. She had begun to murmur, seeing things that were not there. Miriam's face, already pale, became a mask of strained control. On the third morning, the world was silent. The storm had passed. Sunlight, watery and weak, pierced the shack's single dirty window. Miriam stood up. She walked to the door and pushed it open. The air was cold, clean, and sharp. The mud had begun to freeze. Eli managed to sit up, hissing as his wound pulled. "The wagon. The creek took it," Miriam said, not looking at him. "The axle was snapped anyway. We lost everything, except what was on your horse." "He is dead," Eli said, looking out the door. The bay lay on its side, stiff in the half-frozen mud. "Broke his leg in that mire." Miriam closed her eyes for just a moment. She had been counting on that horse. "We will use my mule," she said, "if he is still there." "He is," Eli said. "I can hear him." She turned to him. The control was back. "I am going to Bitterbrush Crossing. My cousin, Ezra, lives there. He will take us in." Eli frowned. He knew this territory. He had run cattle through these foothills. "Bitterbrush?" "Ma'am, that is hard country, and there is no real town there. Just a trading post that washed out 2 years ago." "My cousin is there," she repeated, her voice brittle. "He is waiting for us. He will help." Eli saw the lie. It was plain as the ring on her finger. There was no cousin, but there was something in Bitterbrush Crossing. Or perhaps it was just a direction, a place to run. He knew what it was to run. "It is a long walk," he said. "Then we had best start," she said. "Your sister, she cannot travel like that." "She will," Miriam said. "She has to?" Eli stared at her, at this small, hard woman who held herself together with pure spite and willpower. He owed her his life. He was a wanted man, and she had not turned him out. He used the wall to pull himself to his feet. The room spun, and black spots danced in his vision, but he held on. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "I will help you get there, but we go slow, and we stick to the high ground. The valleys will be flooded." He salvaged what little he could from his dead horse's pack. A handful of cartridges, a whetstone, a coil of rope, and a compass. He looked at the compass in his hand. The glass was cracked, and the needle spun uselessly, trapped by a shard. "Broken," he said, tossing it back into the bag. He looked up at the sun. "We will use that when we can see it." They began the trek. It was a miserable procession. The mule, Jacob, was loaded with Lydia, who was wrapped in blankets and tied to the pack saddle like a fragile piece of cargo. Eli and Miriam walked. Eli leaned heavily on a stick he had cut, his side screaming with every step. Miriam walked ahead, picking the path, her shotgun resting in the crook of her arm. The land was desolate. They were in ghost country. The trail Miriam had been following was not a trail at all, but an old miner's trace that had been abandoned decades ago. There were no tracks, no sign of other travelers, just the wind, the mud, and the high circling buzzards that seemed to be watching them, waiting. That night, they made a cold camp in a shallow overhang of rock. The fire was small, built in a pit to hide the glow. It offered little warmth but kept the wolves at a distance. Lydia was unconscious, her breathing a faint wisp of air. Miriam sat beside her, bathing her face, willing her to live. Eli sat on the other side of the fire. He took the whetstone from his pack and began to sharpen his knife. The sound filled the silence. Shing, shing, shing. The long, rhythmic scrape of steel on stone. Miriam watched him. Her eyes were half-lidded, shadowed with exhaustion, but they never left his hands. She watched the firelight play on the muscles of his forearm, on the ugly snake tattoo? He was a dangerous man. A killer. He had admitted as much. He finished. The blade had a wicked gleam. He tested it on his thumb, then slid it back into the sheath on his belt. He looked up and met her gaze. The silence stretched. "You should get some sleep," he said, his voice low. "I will take the first watch." Miriam just stared, her face unreadable. Eli sighed. He understood. He was a threat. He picked up his bedroll. "I can sleep over by the rocks, if it makes you feel safer." He gestured to a flat boulder 20 yards away. Well outside the small circle of firelight, Miriam watched him. He was offering to separate himself, to put himself in the cold, away from the fire, to ease her fear. She said nothing. She did not ask him to go. She simply pulled her own blanket tighter around her shoulders, turned her back to him, and faced her sister. Eli waited. When she did not speak again, he laid his bedroll down near the fire, but far enough from her to give her space. He sat with his back against the rock wall, his rifle across his knees, and stared out into the vast, dark, and empty wilderness. For 2 days, they walked. The sun was a cruel, white eye in a pale sky, offering no warmth, only a glare that bounced off the half-frozen mud. The land was empty. Eli had been right. The valleys were soupy bogs, forcing them onto the high, rocky ridges where the wind tried to peel the skin from their faces. Eli moved with a pained, hitching gait, his hand often pressed to his bandaged side, but he did not stop. He led the mule, Jacob, who carried the frighteningly still form of Lydia. Miriam walked behind, shotgun in hand, her eyes constantly scanning the back trail. They were a broken little caravan, held together by the thin, tough threads of Miriam's will and Eli's endurance. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, they came to the end of the line. The ridge they were following simply fell away into nothing. A great, jagged wound had been torn in the earth, a ravine easily 60 feet across and twice as deep. The storm had sent a torrent of water through it, scouring the walls clean, and a muddy, angry river still churned at the bottom. On the far side, the ridge continued. Miriam could see the faint trace of the old path, winding its way northeast. That was the way to Bitterbrush Crossing. "No," Miriam whispered. The word was a prayer of denial. She walked to the edge, her boots stopping inches from the drop. "This was it," Eli said, his voice flat. He came to stand beside her, looking down at the wreckage. There had been a bridge once. A few thick timber posts were still anchored in the rock on their side, but the structure itself was gone. It lay in a heap of splintered planks and frayed rope, tangled in the rocks far below. A single thick guide rope still spanned the gap, sagging deep in the middle, but it was frayed and rotten, a useless thread. "We cannot go around," Eli said, scanning the horizon. "This gorge runs for miles. South, it gets wider. North, it is just rock walls. We have to go back," Miriam said, her voice hollow. "Back to what?" Eli asked, turning to look at her. "Back to that shack? Back to the storm?" Miriam's face crumpled. She turned away from him, her shoulders shaking. It was the first time he had seen her control crack. To come this far, to endure the mud, the cold, his own fever, her sister's decline, only to be stopped by a hole in the ground. "I cannot," she began. Her voice choked. "I cannot bury her out here." Eli looked from her to the ravine. He stared at the far side, then at the wreckage below. He looked at the few remaining posts on their side. He was a man who understood broken things. A busted wagon wheel, a splintered corral, a life blown apart by a frame-up. You did not fix them by looking at them. He spat into the mud. "Jacob cannot cross, not on a rope." "Then it is over," she said. "No," Eli said. He limped over to the nearest standing post. It was thick as a man's waist, set deep in the rock. He kicked it. It was solid. He walked to the edge and peered down at the wreckage. "There is timber down there. Good timber, seasoned and dry inside, and rope." Miriam stared at him, not understanding. "It is broken." "So, we unbreak it," he said. He unwound the lariat from his saddle horn, salvaged from his dead horse's pack. He tied it fast around the post. "We need the planks. We need the good rope." "You are going down there?" "It is the only way across," he said, "unless you plan on growing wings." His wound protested. A searing fire in his side, but he ignored it. He was a wanted man. But this was just work. He trusted work. He let himself down the side of the ravine, his boots finding small holds in the rock, the rope burning his hands. Miriam watched him descend. She watched him test his weight on the fallen debris, moving with a grim patience. He began to untangle the mess, pulling lengths of thick rope from the pile, checking them for rot. He found a pulley, its wheel jammed with mud. He found a half-dozen long planks that were cracked but not broken. He tied a rope around one. "Pull!" he shouted up at her. She grabbed the rope and leaned back, her small frame straining. The plank was heavy, slick with mud. She dug her heels in, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It snagged, it slipped, but she pulled. It took her 10 minutes to haul the first plank to the top. By the time she had it flat, he was already tying on another. For the rest of the day, they worked. It was brutal, heartless labor. He climbed down, salvaged and tied. She climbed up, pulled, and stacked. Her hands, already chapped, were rubbed raw. Blisters formed, popped, and bled, leaving fiery red patches on her palms. She did not complain. She just wiped the blood on her trousers and grabbed the rope again. Eli climbed back out of the ravine as the sun was touching the western peaks. He was covered in mud, and a fresh stain of blood had seeped through the bandage on his side. He collapsed against the post, his chest heaving. Miriam brought him the water skin. He drank deeply, the water spilling down his chin. They looked at the pile of materials. It was not much. A few planks, some lengths of rope, the pulley. "It is not enough," Miriam said, her voice hoarse with fatigue. "It is enough for a footbridge." Eli said, "We can fix the guide rope. We can hang the planks from it, one at a time." He looked at her hands. "You did good." She flinched, hiding her palms. "It is just work." There was a heat between them that had nothing to do with the setting sun. It was the heat of shared labor, of sweat and desperation. He saw the strength in her, the sheer, unbending will that kept her moving. She saw the practicality in him, the way he faced an impossible task not with words, but with his hands. He was not a good man. She reminded herself. He was a killer, an outlaw. But he was also the only thing standing between her and utter ruin. They made camp, another small fire against the rocks. Lydia was fading. Her skin was waxy, her breaths so shallow Miriam had to place a hand on her chest to feel them. Miriam sat rocking her sister, humming a tune that had no melody. "She needs a doctor," Eli said quietly, staring into the flames. "There is no doctor in Bitterbrush Crossing," Miriam whispered. Eli looked up. "You said your cousin." "There is no cousin," she said. The admission came out on a broken breath. "There is no Ezra. I lied." Eli waited. He had known it was a lie, but he had let it stand. "I am running," she said, her voice gaining a hard, bitter edge. "My husband, Thomas, he died 6 months ago. A fool. Drank himself into a debt he could not pay, then fell off a saloon roof and broke his neck." She stared into the fire, her eyes seeing something far away. The debt was to Judge Samuel Tolliver, the most powerful man in our county. He owns the bank, the freight line. He is the law. When Thomas died, she continued, her voice dropping, the debt fell to me. I had nothing. The ranch was mortgaged to him. The cattle were his. I had nothing but... She stopped. He called me to his chambers, in the courthouse. He had the papers. He said my husband had put me up as collateral. Eli's head snapped up. What? It was an old law, an indenture contract. He said I was his, that I would work off the debt, in his house. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. He is a fat man. He smells of cigars and sweat. He awarded me to himself, in his own court, all legal. Eli said nothing. but his hand tightened on the knife at his belt. I lived in his house for 2 months. I was his property, his servant, his anything he wanted. She looked down at the branded wedding ring on her finger. He liked this. He said it reminded me I was bound. Then his nephew came to visit. He was Thomas's cousin, a man named Silas. He always wanted. After Thomas died, he tried to take me. He told the judge I was his right as kin. The judge just laughed. 2 weeks ago, Silas came to my room. He was drunk. He said the judge was old, and he was young, and he would have what was his. He put his hands on me. Miriam's voice was ice. I hit him with a fireplace iron. I think I broke his arm. I knew the judge would not protect me. He would see it as damaging his property, and Silas would kill me. Lydia's fever was a gift. I begged the judge to let me take her to my cousin in Bitterbrush, to see a doctor. He laughed, but he let me go. He thinks I'm a foolish woman with a dying sister. He thinks I will fail and come crawling back, or that Silas will find me and drag me back. She finally looked at him. Her eyes were dry, burning with a cold fire. So, you see, there is no cousin. There is just away from them. Eli processed this. The bruised wrist, the ring, the desperate flight. He was a man running from a noose. She was a woman running from a cage. He was not sure which was worse. Tolliver, he said. Samuel Tolliver. You know him? I know of him, Eli said. His name is on half the land warrants in this territory. Most of them forged. Stark, my old boss, did business with him. They are cut from the same rotten cloth. Before Miriam could reply, Eli's hand shot out, grabbing her arm and pulling her down. Get down. Douse the fire. What? A rider, he hissed. Coming up the far side of the ravine. Now. He kicked dirt onto the small fire, plunging their camp into near darkness. He pulled Miriam and the bundled Lydia behind a jumble of boulders. Jacob, the mule, was farther back, tied in a thicket of pines. They waited. The only sound was the wind and the distant rush of the river. Then they heard it. The clink of a horseshoe on stone. A figure on horseback appeared on the opposite rim, silhouetted against the darkening sky. The man sat tall in the saddle, surveying the land. He was too far away to make out his features. But he was not a traveler. He was a hunter. He paused, looking directly across at their position, as if he could smell them. Miriam held her breath. Beside her, Lydia stirred, her breathing becoming a rattling wheeze. No, baby, no, please, not now. Eli put a hand on Lydia, a gesture that was surprisingly gentle, as if his touch alone could command silence. The rider shifted. He dismounted and walked to the edge of the ravine, peering down at the wreckage, then up at the single sagging guide rope. He spat. He turned back to his horse. As he did, the last light of the sun caught the carved leather of his saddle. For a moment, it was perfectly clear. A hawk, wings spread, diving. Eli let out a slow, silent breath. He knew that mark. It was Tolliver's brand, the sign of his private army, the men who burned out homesteaders and enforced his contracts. The rider mounted up. He rode north along the rim, disappearing into the dusk. They waited for a full hour before Eli moved. He rebuilt the fire, his movements quick and angry. He will be back, Eli said. He was checking the crossing. He will report it is down, and they will look for another way, or they will wait. They know you have to cross here. Miriam was shaking, the reaction to the fear setting in. What do we do? We've finished the bridge, he said. We cross before they come back. That night, sleep was impossible. They sat by the fire, the shared confession and the shared danger creating a new, strange intimacy. They were two fugitives, trapped between a broken bridge and a closing net. You could leave, Miriam said suddenly, looking at his scarred hands. You do not owe me this. You saved us. I have put you in more danger. They are not looking for me, he said. That brand, they are looking for you. He paused. Besides, where would I go? I have been running for 6 months. I am tired of it. I am tired of empty country. You regret it? she asked. "What you did, the men you—" "I regret getting caught," Eli said. "I regret trusting a man like Stark. The men I killed, they drew on me. It was a fair fight, the ones I worked for. They were the real killers. I just looked the other way because the pay was good. That I regret." Miriam looked down at her own hands, at the raw, broken blisters. "I regret marrying Thomas. I thought he was kind. He was just weak. And I regret not fighting back sooner. I let that judge, I let him. For 2 months, I just obeyed." She reached out, her fingers trembling, and lightly touched the back of his hand, where the old scar from a rope burn crossed his knuckles. It was a hesitant, curious touch. Eli's entire body tensed. He started to pull his hand away, a lifetime of violence and isolation making him recoil from the contact. But he stopped. Her fingers were rough, cold, but steady. He looked at her, and she did not look away. He held his hand still, letting her touch him. It was a fragile, silent truce. "We will cross," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "We will get Lydia to a town. There is no we. Eli, as soon as I'm across, you should go. Head west. Do not let me be the reason you get caught. We will cross," he repeated, and his voice left no room for argument. A cold wind picked up, smelling of iron and wet earth. A drop of rain hit the stone beside Eli's hand. Then another. "Damn it!" Eli swore. Looking up, the stars were gone, swallowed by clouds. "He is coming back! The rain!" They raced. There was no more talk. The first gray light of dawn found them working in a driving, icy drizzle. Eli was at the edge of the ravine, securing the old guide rope, reinforcing it with the lengths he had salvaged. Miriam was drilling holes in the planks with his knife, her raw hands screaming in protest, threading smaller ropes through them. He was resetting the pulley on the main post. "We will slide the planks out, one by one," he shouted over the wind. "I will go first. Secure them. Then you bring Lydia." "How?" she yelled back. "The mule cannot walk on that. He does not have to. We use the pulley. We get him in a sling. We slide him across. God help him. Then you and your sister." It was insane. It was a plan born of pure desperation. He finished his knots. He looped the first plank onto the guide rope. He looked at Miriam. "Stay here. Feed me the planks." He stepped off the edge. He put his weight on the sagging rope, his arms and legs wrapped around it, and began to pull himself, hand over hand, toward the center. The plank slid with him. The rope groaned. He was 30 feet out, dangling over the churning water, when a gust of wind slammed into him. He swung wildly, his wounded side screaming. Miriam watched, her heart in her throat. He stopped, breathed, and kept going. He reached the far side. He secured the plank, lashing it to the far posts. He yelled. She sent another and another. It took an hour of wind, rain, and agonizing tension. He had a bridge. It was a terrible thing, a swaying, narrow footwalk of mismatched planks, hanging by knots and hope, but it was a bridge. "The mule!" he shouted. "Get him in the sling!" They had practiced this. She had the ropes ready. She blindfolded Jacob, who trembled and fought, but she spoke to him, her voice a low, soothing murmur, and he quieted. They looped the ropes under his belly, tied them to the pulley, and hooked it onto the guide rope. "Now!" Eli yelled. Miriam shoved the mule off the edge. The animal brayed, a sound of pure terror, its legs kicking in the open air. It swung. It spun. But Eli was on the far side, pulling the pulley rope, dragging the animal across the abyss. Jacob hit the far bank hard, collapsing in a heap, but he was alive. "Lydia," Eli called. "Send Lydia." Miriam wrapped her sister in the last dry blanket. She kissed her forehead. "It is all right, baby. We're going to fly." She secured her to the pulley, a small, light bundle, and sent her across. Eli caught her easily. "Your turn. Miriam." Miriam tied the shotgun to her back and stepped to the edge. She hooked her own harness, a simple loop of rope, to the pulley. She looked down. The river looked hungry. Crack. The sound was sharp, louder than the wind. It was not thunder. It was a rifle. The main guide rope, inches from her face, snapped. Fibers exploded. The rope split. The entire bridge, the planks, the pulley. Eli's hard work. Dropped a foot, then caught, held only by the secondary ropes he had tied. Miriam screamed as she was jerked forward. She was not on the cliff. She was dangling. Crack! Another shot. This one struck the rock where she had been standing, sending stone chips flying. She saw them, 3 riders, at the bend in the trail, not 500 yards away. One was raising his rifle for a 3rd shot. "Eli!" she screamed. The bridge was falling apart. The planks were slipping. Eli was on the other side, his face a mask of fury. He could not come back for her. He unhooked Lydia from the pulley. "Pull!" he roared. "Use your hands! Pull!" Miriam grabbed the rope above her head. Her bloody, raw palms screamed as they took her weight. She pulled. Once, twice. The pulley scraped on the dying rope. The man on the ridge fired again. The bullet sang past her ear. She was 10 feet out, 20. She was halfway. "I got you!" Eli yelled. He was at his edge of the ravine, lying flat on his belly, his arm stretched out. "Come on, keep pulling!" She pulled again. Her arms were jelly. She could not. The bridge gave another sickening lurch. The main rope was unraveling fast. Eli stretched farther. "Miriam, let go of the rope! Grab my hand! I will fall! Grab my hand! Trust me!" She was 5 feet from him. She let go with one hand, her body swinging sickeningly, and lunged. Her fingers brushed his. She missed. She swung back. The rifle cracked again. This time, she did not hesitate. She let go completely. A desperate, blind jump. Just as the last strands of the guide rope snapped, she fell. His hand clamped around her wrist. The force of her fall nearly pulled him over the edge. His boots scraped the rock. He grunted, his wounded side ripping open. But he held. He was iron. He held her dangling weight with one arm. Behind her, the last of the bridge tore free and fell, crashing into the river below. The connection was gone. Miriam was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She was alive. She was staring up into his face, which was inches from hers, strained and terrible. He did not pull her up. Not yet. He just held her. "I got you," he whispered, his voice a raw rasp. The riders on the far side were yelling, furious. They were trapped. They could not cross. Miriam stared at Eli. She reached up with her free hand and clamped it over his, her grip matching his. She did not let go. He did not pull her up. For a long, terrible moment, he just held her, dangling over the abyss, his one arm locked like a steel trap on her wrist. His face was a mask of agonizing effort, the muscles in his neck cords, the fresh blood on his side staining his shirt a darker, wetter crimson. On the far side of the ravine, the 3 riders were screaming, their voices thin and furious on the wind. They were trapped, defeated by the empty air. "Eli," Miriam breathed, her voice a dry rasp. His arm contracted, with a single, brutal grunt that seemed to tear something from deep inside him. He hauled her upward. She scrambled for purchase with her boots, finding a crack in the rock, and then she was over the edge, collapsing onto the muddy shelf beside him. She lay on her stomach, gasping, the smell of wet rock and his blood filling her lungs. He rolled onto his back beside her, his chest heaving, his eyes squeezed shut in pain. "Lydia," Miriam choked out, crawling toward her sister. Lydia was as she had been left, a small, still bundle by the pulley post. Jacob, the mule, was on his feet, trembling violently. "We go," Eli forced out, pushing himself to one elbow. The rifle shot from the far side was a parting gesture of rage, striking the rock high above their heads. "Now, before they find a way to head us off." There was no time for thanks, no time for shock. Miriam got Lydia onto the mule, her hands shaking so badly she could barely tie the knots. Eli, grim-faced, checked the mule's load, then took the reins. He did not look back at the ravine. He just turned his face to the high, empty country ahead and began to walk, dragging his wounded leg. Miriam followed. the useless shotgun still strapped to her back. She did not look back either. There was nothing behind them but a broken bridge and a life she could never return to. They entered ghost country. The land changed. The high ridges gave way to a wide, desolate plateau of gray sagebrush and alkali dust. The storm had passed through here, but it had not brought life. It had only washed away the thin layer of soil, revealing the bones of the earth beneath. They walked for hours. The silence broken only by the clop, clop, clop of the mule's hooves and the whistle of the wind through skeletal, fire-blackened trees. They passed a homestead, or what was left of it. The cabin was a pile of charred timbers, the chimney a lone monument of river stone. A rusted plow blade lay half buried in the mud, its wooden handles long since rotted away. Farther on, they found a small, fenced plot with 3 wooden crosses, all of them knocked over. This was a place that had been deliberately emptied. As the sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of blood and sulfur, Eli stopped. He was staring at a large ponderosa pine that stood alone by the side of the dead trail. Nailed to its trunk was a plank of wood. The letters burned deep. Property of Tolliver Co. Trespassers will hang. Miriam read the words, and a cold deeper than the wind settled in her stomach. This was his land. This was the cage she had fled, and it was 1,000 times larger than she had ever imagined. "He owns all of it," she whispered, her voice dead. "There is nowhere to run." "He owns the paper," Eli said, his voice a low gravel. He ripped the sign from the tree, the old nails screeching in protest. "He does not own the dirt, or the air." He threw the sign to the ground. "We are not trespassing, we are surviving." But the encounter, on top of the escape, had taken the last of their strength. Eli's wound was weeping. Miriam's hands were a raw, pulpy mess. And Lydia was dying. Her fever, which had been a low, steady burn, now roared. Her skin was incandescent, her lips cracked and white. When Miriam tried to give her water, she did not swallow. That night, they camped in the shallow lee of a rock formation. The air was still, and Miriam, cleaning her sister's face, heard her whisper, "Mama?" Miriam's blood froze. "I am here. Lydia, it is Miriam." "It is so bright," Lydia murmured, her eyes wide open but seeing nothing. "Papa is waiting. He has the wagon. He says we can go home now." "No, Lydia," Miriam said, her voice starting to tremble. "We are not going home. You stay with me. You stay with me." "It is all right, Miriam." Lydia sighed, a small, content sound. "It does not hurt anymore. It is so quiet." Miriam stood up. She walked away from the small fire, away from Eli's silent, watchful gaze. She walked until she came to the bank of a dried creek bed, a scar of cracked mud and pale stones. She looked up at the cold, indifferent stars, and she broke. It was not a sound of weeping. It was a raw, primal tearing, a sound of an animal caught in a trap, a sound she had held inside for months. She fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the hard earth. She had failed. She had run from a monster, only to lead her sister to this. She had traded a slow death for a fast one. All her fight, all her will, had amounted to this, kneeling in the dirt, listening to her sister welcome their dead parents. She did not hear Eli come up behind her. He did not touch her. He just stood there, a tall, dark shadow against the stars, letting her grief tear itself out. When her sobs finally quieted into ragged, choking breaths, he spoke. "This is not where it ends," he said. She turned, her face a pale, tear-streaked mask in the dark. "She is dying. I killed her. I should have stayed. I should have—" "What?" he cut in, his voice sharp. "Let that man, let Tolliver. You chose to live. You chose to fight. That is all we get, Miriam. The choice." He looked around, not at her, but at the land, as if reading a map only he could see. "I worked these hills, before Stark, before the syndicates. I was a boy, trapping. This was just land. Then—" He pointed with his chin toward a dark line of mesas in the distance. "There is an old assay office, 2 miles north, built into the rock. We can hide there. It is dry. He knelt, his joints cracking. He gently took a handful of the dirt she'd been clawing. This is hard pan, but it is not dead. He helped her to her feet. His grip was rough, but sure. You get your sister. I will build a shelter. The assay office was little more than a cave, a hole dug into the side of a sandstone cliff, fronted by a crumbling wall of stacked rock. Inside, it smelled of dust and old iron. A rusted ore cart lay on its side. A few broken tools, a pickaxe head, a shattered shovel handle, were scattered on the floor. While Miriam settled Lydia onto their last good blanket, Eli used the broken tools and his own knife to build a low, hidden shelter of brush and fallen rock just outside the entrance, a place where they could have a fire that would not be seen from the plateau. He sat, staring into the flames, his face grim. "When I was a boy," he said, not looking at her, "running traps, I got bit by a rattler, a bad one. I would have died." Miriam looked up, her eyes hollow. "There was an old woman, lived up in the rocks, Shoshone mostly. Folks said she was a healer. My PA did not hold with that, but he carried me to her." Eli touched a faint, silvery scar on his wrist. "She knew things. About roots, about fevers. She saved my life." Miriam's head snapped up. A desperate, terrible hope ignited in her eyes. "Is she still there? Can you find her?" Eli hesitated. He looked at Lydia, who was slipping deeper into the coma. He looked at Miriam's face, hanging on his every word. "Ma'am, that was 15 years ago. She was old then. I do not even know if—" "You must," Miriam said. She scrambled over to him and grabbed the front of his shirt. Her raw hands, caked in dirt and blood, held him with a terrifying strength. "You know these hills. You said so. You have to go. Please, please, Eli." He looked at her hands on his chest. He looked at her eyes. He knew what it meant. "If I go," he said, his voice low. "You are alone. Those men, they are not the only ones Tolliver has. This is his country. They will be looking. That man I saw. He will have found the tracks by now." "I do not care," she said, her voice a desperate whisper. "She will be dead by morning. If you go, she has a chance. If you stay, you are just staying to watch her die. Please, I am begging you." He saw the gamble. He saw the danger. Leaving her here, defenseless, was a fool's errand. But looking at Lydia, he knew that staying was a death sentence. He gently pried her fingers from his shirt. "I will go," he said. "Barricade the entrance after me. Do not light a fire. Do not come out. For any reason. Do not make a sound. I will be back by dawn, either way." He took his knife, his rifle, and a skin of water. He looked at her one last time. "Do not open that door, Miriam. Not for anyone but me." She nodded, her eyes wide with fear and a crushing gratitude. He slipped out into the darkness. She listened to his footsteps fade, then rolled a heavy, flat stone in front of the low entrance, leaving only a crack for air. She sat in the black, cold dark. She held Lydia's hand, which was hot and dry as paper. The silence was absolute. It was a living thing, a predator. Every gust of wind was a footstep. Every scrape of a branch was a man's voice. She must have dozed. A shallow, terrified sleep, slumped against the rock wall. She woke to the sound of whispering. "Is this it? The old assay? Looks like it. Tracks stop here. Fresh tracks. A mule. And 2 sets of boots. One small, one large." Miriam's heart stopped. She did not breathe. "Well," a second voice said. "This one rougher. Let us see who is home." The stone in the entrance scraped, then rolled aside. Pale moonlight flooded the small cave. 2 men stood silhouetted in the opening. One was large, a heavy man with a thick beard. The other was thinner, weaselly. He was the one she had seen at the ravine, and on his saddle, tied to the mule outside. She could see it, the hawk brand. "Well, well," the thin man said, his voice oozing satisfaction. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dark. He saw her. He saw the small form on the floor. The judge was right. She did not get far. Miriam scrambled backward, pressing herself against the far wall, her hand flying to her throat. "Where is the man, girl?" the big one demanded, stepping in beside him. "The one with the boot tracks." Miriam stared, her mind racing, blank with terror. "He run off. Silas?" the big man asked, laughing. "He ain't here now. Is he Jed?" The thin man, Silas, replied. He stepped toward Miriam. She could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. "So, you thought you could run from the judge? Thought you could run from me?" His eyes raked over her. "Stealing his property. That is a hanging offense. The child is sick," Miriam stammered. "We were going for a doctor. Child is near dead." Jed grunted, nudging Lydia with his boot. Miriam cried out. "Leave her alone!" "Quiet!" Silas snarled. He reached out and grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. "You made a mess. Miriam, a real mess. Broke my arm, you little witch!" He gestured to his arm, which was wrapped in a dirty sling. "The judge, he is not happy. He wants his property back, and I am to be rewarded for finding you." He smiled, and his teeth were brown. "He said I could have my punishment first, before we take you back." Jed laughed. "She is a fighter. Silas, better tie her up." Panic, cold and absolute, flooded Miriam. She was trapped. Eli was gone. She was going to be. "My husband will kill you." She spat. The words came from nowhere, from a place of pure, primal defiance. Both men froze. Silas let go of her hair. "What?" Silas said, his smile faltering. "Your husband is dead. Thomas is dead." "Not him," Miriam said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "My new husband, the man whose tracks you followed. He is a killer. He is wanted. He killed 3 men in Miles City just last week." The men exchanged a look. There was a bounty poster in Miles City. They had all seen it. The name, Eli. "You are lying," Jed said, but his voice was uncertain. "Am I?" Miriam said. She forced a coldness into her voice she did not feel. "Why do you think I am out here? We are running from the law. He just went to hunt. He will be back, and when he finds you, put your hands on me." Silas's face darkened. He did not like this. He did not like a man with a reputation. But he also saw Miriam, alone and cornered. "He left you," Silas sneered, trying to regain his footing. "Left you with a dying girl. Does not sound like much of a husband to me." "Sounds like he cut his losses." "He will be back," Miriam repeated, like a prayer. "We will be long gone before then," Silas said, advancing again. "You and me, we have unfinished business. Jed, grab her." Jed moved. Miriam screamed and scrambled away, grabbing the one thing she could find, the heavy iron pickaxe head. She held it up, a useless, heavy weapon. "I will kill you," she shrieked. "I like it when they fight." Jed grinned and lunged. A shadow filled the doorway. It was not a man. It was a wraith. Eli stood there, silent, his rifle in one hand, but it was not raised. He was breathing hard. He had run the whole way. "Get," he said, his voice a low, deadly rumble. "Away from her." Silas and Jed froze. They turned. Silas's eyes went wide, recognizing the man from the wanted posters. Well, it is him. It is Eli." Jed, the bigger man, was not impressed. He was already moving, his hand dropping to the pistol holstered on his hip. "He is just one man. He is wounded. Take him. Silas." Jed drew his gun. He was fast, but Eli was faster. Eli did not go for his rifle. He did not go for the gun on his own hip. His hand blurred to his belt and back. The sound was a thwack, solid and wet, like an axe sinking into green wood. Jed stopped. He looked down. Eli's skinning knife was buried to the hilt in his chest. Jed looked up at Eli, his eyes wide with a terrible, stupid surprise. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. He just folded, collapsing onto the dirt floor of the cave like a sack of grain. Silas did not move. He stared at Jed's body. He stared at the blood pooling. He stared at Eli, who had not moved, who stood in the doorway, his chest rising and falling, his face a mask of cold exhaustion. Silas whimpered. He was a bully, not a fighter. He turned, scrambling on all fours like a crab, and fled from the cave. He threw himself onto his horse and galloped frantically into the night, the sound of his panic swallowed by the vast, empty darkness. Silence. The cave was silent, but for the sound of Jed's last, ragged breath, which ended in a wet gurgle. Miriam was still pressed against the wall, the pickaxe head held in her white-knuckled grip. Her whole body was vibrating, a low, terrible tremor that came from the bone. Eli stepped over the body. He did not look at it. He looked at her. He saw the pickaxe. He saw her terrified eyes. He saw the marks on her neck where Silas had grabbed her hair. He walked over to her. He did not speak. He just reached out and gently took the heavy piece of iron from her hands. It fell to the floor with a dull thud. Then he pulled her in. He wrapped his arms around her and just held her. He was solid, real. He smelled of pine and sweat and the cold night air. Miriam collapsed against him. She did not cry. She just trembled. She shook so violently she thought her teeth would break. She buried her face in his bloody shirt and held on, her fingers digging into his back. He held her just as tightly. He held her until the trembling slowed, until her ragged breathing started to even out. He held her in the dark, in the silence, with a dead man at their feet. After a long time, she leaned back, though she did not leave his arms. She looked up at him in the pale moonlight. "I have never," she whispered, her voice rough, "seen a man kill for me before." Eli looked at her. His eyes were dark, shadowed. "He was going to hurt you." "You came back," she said. "I heard the horses," he said. He held up a small leather pouch. "The healer was gone. Her granddaughter was there. She gave me this, for the fever." He had come back. He had run, wounded, to save her. They did not speak of it again that night. He sat with his back to the wall, his rifle across his lap, and watched the entrance. Miriam tended to Lydia, forcing the dark, herbal mixture from the pouch between her sister's lips. And they listened. They listened to the man. Jed bleed out. It took hours. It was a slow, agonizing, wet sound in the darkness. Miriam covered her ears, but she could not block it out. This was the cost. This was the price of her freedom. When the sun finally rose, the man was still. Eli stood up. "We have to bury him before the other one comes back with friends." He dragged the body out of the cave. He found a shallow depression between two boulders. He took the broken shovel. The earth was hard. It was dry, rocky, and unforgiving. It took hours. Eli dug. His wound was open again, his movement stiff. After watching him for 10 minutes, Miriam picked up the pickaxe head. She did not say a word. She just knelt and began to break the hard-packed soil. They worked together. The sun beat down on them. They were covered in sweat and dirt. They did not talk. They just dug. When the hole was deep enough, they rolled the body in. They covered it. They piled heavy rocks on top to keep the coyotes away. When it was done, they stood over the raw earth, two figures coated in grime. There was no more pretending. He was a killer, and she was his accomplice. They were bound, not by vows, but by this, by the blood on the cave floor and the body in the ground. They went back to the cave. Eli cleaned his knife. Miriam went to check on Lydia. She touched her sister's forehead. It was cool. Miriam gasped. She touched it again. The raging fire was gone. Lydia's skin was damp with sweat. Her breathing was no longer a shallow rasp, but a deep, even sleep. The fever had broken. Miriam looked at Eli. He was watching her, his face unreadable. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down Miriam's face. It was not the grief of the night before. It was a release so profound it left her weak. He had saved them. He had saved Lydia. He had saved her. That night, The air in the cave was different. The body was gone. The threat had passed. For now. Lydia slept peacefully. Eli laid his bedroll by the entrance, as he always did. Miriam laid hers by her sister. For an hour, there was only the sound of breathing. Then, Miriam sat up. Eli watched her. She picked up her bedroll. She stood, a slim shadow in the faint starlight from the entrance. She walked across the small cave, and she laid her bedroll down next to his. He did not move. He did not speak. He just watched her. She lay down, her back to him. He could feel the small heat of her body, inches from his. He closed his eyes. He thought it was about gratitude. He thought it was about safety. Then, he felt her hand. It was seeking his, in the small space between them. Her fingers, still raw, found his scarred hand and held on. She rolled over, turning to face him. Her eyes were dark pools, filled with a need that was older than fear, older than grief. It was the need to be alive, to feel something other than pain. "Please," she whispered, the sound so quiet it was barely air. "Just tonight." Eli tensed. His whole body went rigid. She was not his. She was a wife, bound by a law he despised, but bound all the same. She was vulnerable. And he was a wanted man, a killer, with a dead man's blood still under his fingernails. He started to pull away. She held on tighter. "Please," she whispered again, and this time there was no begging in it. It was a demand. It was her choice. He looked at her, at the strength that had survived a cruel husband, a predatory judge, a killing storm, and the terror of the night. She was not a fragile thing. She was a survivor. She was like him. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he gave in. He moved his arm, pulling her closer, and let the pretense of their separation fall away. Miriam woke to the cold. It was not the sharp, bitter cold of the storm, but a damp, penetrating chill that came from the rock walls of the cave. She was lying on her side, tangled in her bedroll and a man's heavy wool coat. His coat. She was pressed against him, his back to her front, his body a solid, warm wall in the darkness. His arm was draped heavy over her waist, holding her close even in sleep. The memory of the night came to her not as a jolt, but as a slow, spreading warmth. The desperation was gone. The raw, frantic need to feel alive had been replaced by something quiet, something deep. It had not been a taking, but a giving, a slow, careful, silent conversation in the dark, a mapping of scars, a shared breath. She lay still, listening to his breathing, even and deep. She had never felt this. Not with Thomas, who was all quick, selfish fumbling. Not in Tolliver's house, which was a cold, dutiful terror. This was rest. Then, a small sound from the other side of the cave. A cough. Miriam was out of the bedroll in an instant, Eli's coat falling from her shoulders. She scrambled across the stone floor to where Lydia lay. Her sister's eyes were open. They were not wide and vacant, staring at the ghosts of their parents. They were slitted, blurry, but they were looking at her. "Miriam?" Lydia whispered. Her voice was a dry, cracked reed, but it was her voice. Miriam's hand flew to her sister's forehead. It was cool, damp. The fire was gone. The fever had broken. "Oh, Lydia," Miriam choked out, grabbing the water skin. "Lydia, you are back. You are back." She lifted her sister's head, pouring a few precious drops onto her lips. Lydia swallowed, coughed, and swallowed again. "It is cold," Lydia whispered, shivering. "I know, baby, I know. We are safe." Miriam looked back at Eli, who was sitting up, rubbing the sleep from his face, his hair matted. He saw her face, the tears streaming down it, the way she was clutching her sister. He saw Lydia, awake. A slow, tired smile touched his mouth. "The healer's medicine," he said. "You," Miriam whispered, her voice thick. "It was you." The tenderness of the moment, the impossible relief, hung in the cold air of the cave. It was a new world. They had survived. And then, From the world outside came the sound, a long, baying howl, echoing off the high canyon walls. It was not a wolf. It was too deep, too trained. Eli was on his feet before the echo died. The smile was gone, his face instantly a hard, grim mask. He moved to the cave entrance, pressing himself flat against the rock. Peering through a tiny crack, the howl came again. Closer. What is it? Miriam asked, her voice tight with new fear. Pulling Lydia into her arms. Hounds, Eli said, his voice a low growl. Bloodhounds, not trappers' dogs. They are Tollivers. They are on our trail. The one who got away. Silas. He brought them. Miriam's new world shattered. How long? An hour? Maybe 2. They are moving fast, Eli said. He turned, already kicking dirt onto the small, smoldering fire. We have to move, now. We cannot, Miriam pleaded, looking at her sister. She is awake, but she is weak. She cannot ride. She can barely sit. Eli ran his hand through his hair, his eyes darting around the cave as if an answer was written on the walls. He was a man trapped. They will find the grave. They will find this cave. They are on our scent, and they will not stop. He stopped pacing. He looked at Miriam, his gaze intense. I know a place, from when I was a boy. A different cave. A true one. Not an assay hole. It is higher up, in the fissures. Hard to find if you do not know it. Colder, but hidden. Can we make it? We do not have a choice, he said. They left the cave in the pale gray of pre-dawn. There was no time to cover their tracks. Eli carried Lydia in his arms, her small form wrapped in every blanket they had. Miriam loaded the mule with their few possessions. The trek was an agony. They could not follow the ridges. They had to stay low, in the rocky, winding creek beds, where the water would wash away their scent. It was slow, treacherous going. Eli's wound had stiffened, and Miriam could see the pain in his face with every step. But he never slowed, his arms locked around Lydia. After an hour, they rounded a bend and saw smoke. Not a campfire, but the thick, greasy black smoke of a burning home. Eli motioned for Miriam to stay with the mule. He crept forward, his rifle ready. He crested a small rise and looked down. It was the homestead they had passed days before, the one with the broken plow. Or rather, it had been. Now, it was a pyre. Tolliver's men had been there. They had come back to finish the job. As they watched, a small shape darted from a patch of scrub brush near the creek. A woman. She was followed by a man, half carrying 2 small children. They were running from the burning house, carrying nothing. Hold, Eli said, stepping out. The man raised a broken piece of wood, but froze when he saw Eli's rifle. We are not with them, Eli said, his voice low. We are running, same as you. The woman's face was a mask of soot and despair. Her eyes were dead. They came back, she whispered. Said the judge. Said the land was cleared. Said we were squatters. They gave us 5 minutes. Tolliver's men? Miriam asked, coming up beside Eli. The woman nodded. The Hawk brand? They took our seed. They took our mule. And then they lit the roof. Where will you go? Miriam asked. South, the man said, his voice hollow. Just south, away from this whole damn territory. There is nothing here. He has taken it all. The woman looked at Miriam, at the sister in Eli's arms. She saw a shared, desperate flight. Her hand went to her neck. She was wearing a simple scarf, a dark blue wool, worn but clean. She pulled it off. Winter is coming, the woman said, her voice flat. She held it out to Miriam. You will need it. I cannot, Miriam started. Take it. The woman insisted. Take it. So something of ours, so something, survives. Remember us. Miriam took the scarf. Its wool was rough against her raw hands. She tied it around her own neck, a token of a war she had not known she was fighting. God go with you, the man said, and he grabbed his wife's hand, pulling his children south, disappearing into the gray brush like ghosts. Eli and Miriam watched them go. Eli's jaw was a hard, white line of rage. "He is not just a man," Eli said. "He is a plague." He turned and pushed them harder, up a steep, rocky incline that seemed to lead nowhere. He stopped at a wall of sandstone, thick with ancient, gnarled junipers. He pushed aside a heavy curtain of branches. Behind it was a dark, narrow split in the rock. "In here," he said. The cave was deep. It was not a man-made hole, but a true fissure, winding back into the earth. It was cold, and the floor was uneven. But 100 feet in, it opened into a small, dry chamber, high enough to stand in. It was completely dark. "They will not find this," Eli said. "The dogs will lose the scent on the rocks. We can rest here. We can wait them out." He built a small, smokeless fire of dry juniper wood deep in the cave, the smoke filtering up through a tiny crack in the ceiling far above. They settled Lydia near it. She was already asleep again, the journey having taken all her new strength. For hours. They sat in silence, the only sound the faint crackle of the fire and the distant, fading howls of the dogs. Frustrated on the stone slopes below, the danger had passed. For now. But the tension in the cave was thick. "You have to go," Eli said, his voice startling in the quiet. Miriam looked at him. "What?" "When Lydia is stronger, in a day, maybe 2, you take the mule. You head west. There is a town, 3 Forks. It is big enough you can get lost. Get on a stage, go to Idaho, Oregon. I do not care. Just go." "Go?" she repeated, numb. "What about you?" "I will lead them off," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "I will ride south, back toward the grave. They are hunting me as much as you. I will pull them away." "Give you time." Miriam stared at him. "You want me to run? Again? I want you to live," he said, his voice sharp. "Tolliver has men everywhere. That brand, it is his. This whole country is his. You cannot fight him. You cannot hide. All you can do is run." "No." The word was quiet, but it was hard as the rock around them. "Miriam, this is not a choice. This is survival. It is what I do. It is what you have to do." "No," she said. Louder. She stood up, her small frame vibrating with a sudden, cold fury. "I have been running my whole life. I ran from my father's house into a marriage with a weakling. I ran from that house into a cage with a monster. I ran from him into the wilderness. I have done nothing but run, and every time, the cage just gets bigger." She pointed back the way they came. "That woman, he burned her home. You, he put a bounty on your head. Me, he signed a paper. It is all the same. He is a king, and we are just things. Insects." "Miriam?" Eli stood, reaching for her. "Do not," she snapped, backing away. "Do not tell me to run. If I run now, if I take my sister and run west, I'm just a slave again. I'm a slave to him, 1,000 miles away. I will be looking over my shoulder every day for the rest of my life. That is not living. That is just a different kind of grave." "What do you want to do then?" he yelled, his own frustration breaking. "Walk into his parlor? Shoot him? They will hang you before your sister draws her next breath. This is not a saloon fight. This is a war, and we are losing." "Then we stop running," she said, her voice dropping, trembling with the force of her conviction. "We stop letting him win. I would rather die, here, on my feet, than live another day on my knees, running." Eli stared at her. He saw the woman who had pushed a wagon from the mud, the woman who had held planks with bloody hands, the woman who had stood ready with a pickaxe to fight 2 armed men. She was not the same woman he had met, or perhaps she was, and he was just seeing her clearly for the first time. He had no answer. He just sank back down by the fire, defeated by her will. The rest of the day passed in a thick, heavy silence. Night fell. The cave grew colder. Lydia slept. Eli sat staring into the fire, lost in his own dark thoughts. Miriam, her argument spent, felt the cold seep into her bones. She shivered. Eli looked up. He said nothing. He just took off his heavy wool coat and tossed it to her. She wrapped it around herself. It was big, heavy. It smelled of him. Smoke, wool, horse, and something metallic, like old steel. She huddled in it, her anger fading, leaving only a cold, tired ache. She sat near him, but not touching. "The names," she said, her voice quiet. He looked at her. "On your chest," she said. "Last night, I felt them. The ink. What are they?" He did not answer for a long time. He looked into the fire. "Brothers," he said. "Your family? No, not by blood. The men I rode with before Stark. My first outfit. We were young, stupid, thought we were kings. What happened to them? What always happens," he said, his voice flat. "A card game, a stolen horse, a fight we should have run from. One by one, Pete, Sam, Jonah." He touched his own chest, as if tracing the letters she had traced. "I am the only one left." "You left them?" His head snapped up, his eyes defensive. "It was a fight I could not win. A whole posse. They stayed. I ran. That is what I do. Miriam, I survive. I am the one who always runs." The word hung in the air between them, connecting their argument to his confession. Miriam looked at his face, at the self-loathing etched there. She moved closer. She sat beside him, pulling the coat around her. "You survived," she said, her voice soft. "You ran so you could be here, so you could push my wagon, so you could build that bridge, so you could come back for me." She touched his arm. "You are not leaving anyone behind this time." He looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. He saw no judgment, only a deep, quiet understanding. He had run from his past, and it had led him directly here. He leaned his head back against the cold stone. "I do not know how to fight this." "Miriam, he is a judge. He is the law." "The law," she said, bitterness in her voice. "The law says I am his property." The silence returned, but it was different now. It was shared. The argument was over. They were just two people, trapped. He put his arm around her, pulling her against his side for warmth. She leaned her head against his shoulder, wrapped in his coat. They sat like that for a long time. Eventually, he lay down, pulling her with him. They lay on his bedroll, facing each other. The fire was low, casting flickering, orange light on their faces. Last night had been a storm, a desperate, frantic need. This was quiet. He raised a hand, his rough fingers tracing the line of her jaw. She did not flinch. She watched his eyes. He saw her fear, her strength, and her defiance. She saw his regret, his weariness, and his own buried resolve. He leaned in. He did not kiss her. He just rested his forehead against hers. They breathed the same air. "I will not let him take you," he whispered. "I will not let you run," she whispered back. He kissed her then. It was not the kiss from the bridge, sharp with adrenaline and fear. It was slow. It was deep. It was a promise made in the dark, with no hope of being kept. It was a slow, quiet claiming. There was no rush. There was no desperation. There was just the profound, silent, an absolute need to be. For one more night. Two people instead of one. At dawn, the howls were back. They were distant, circling, but they had not given up. Eli stood, his face set in a hard mask. The intimacy of the night was gone, replaced by the grim reality of the morning. "They are on my trail," he said. "From the grave. They will find it. They will circle. They will not find this cave, but they will not leave the area. We cannot wait." He took the last of the jerky, his rifle, and his gun belt. "My plan stands," he said. "I will take the mule. I will lead them south. A hard run. They will follow a man on a mule." "Eli, no. You argued," he said, cutting her off. "But you did not give me a better plan. This is the only way. I will pull them far enough south that you have a chance. A day. Maybe two." He grabbed her arms. His grip was hard. "Promise me, Miriam, you will take your sister. You will go west. You will not stop. You will not look back. You will live. Promise me." She looked into his eyes. She saw the sacrifice he was making. He was running again, not from, but for. She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "I promise," she whispered. He kissed her. It was a hard, fast, desperate kiss. A goodbye. "Survive," he said. He left the cave. She watched him go. A tall, broad-shouldered man walking toward his own end. The moment his footsteps faded, she turned. She did not cry. Her face was a mask of cold, hard purpose. She had made a promise. She had no intention of keeping it. She found the small, rickety cart left by the burned-out family, hidden in the brush near their old camp. It was a miserable thing. But the wheels turned. She went back to the cave. "Lydia," she said, her voice clear. "We are leaving." Lydia was weak, but she was clear-eyed. "Where is Eli?" "He has gone to buy us time," Miriam said, bundling her sister in the blankets. "We are going west?" Miriam carried her sister to the cart and settled her in. She tied the blue scarf the woman had given her around her head, pulling it low, covering her hair, shadowing her face. She looked like any other weary, beaten woman in this territory. "No," Miriam said, gripping the wooden handle of the cart. "We are going to Bitterbrush Crossing." Lydia's eyes went wide. "Miriam, no! The judge!" "The judge is there," Miriam said, her voice flat. "That is where Silas went. That is where they are all based. I am done running from shadows. Lydia, I am going to face the man." She began to walk, pulling the cart over the rocky ground. She did not go west. She did not go south. She circled wide, east, toward the faint pillar of smoke that marked the small, rotten heart of Tolliver's territory. It took her hours. She was weak from hunger, her arms and legs aching from pulling the cart, but she did not stop. Every time she faltered, she felt the wool of the scarf against her neck, and she saw the dead eyes of the woman who had given it to her. She came over the last rise. There it was, Bitterbrush Crossing. It was not a town, it was a scar, a muddy main street. 24 buildings, most of them boarded up. The only two places with any life were a large saloon and, across from it, a newly painted building, Tolliver Company, Land Assay Office. In front of it sat a fine, black carriage, and horses with the Hawk brand. Silas was there, his arm in a sling, talking to a large man in a fine black suit and a bowler hat. The man was fat, his face pink, smoking a cigar. Judge Samuel Tolliver. Miriam did not hesitate. She pulled the cart straight down the center of the muddy street. Heads turned. A few men lounging on the saloon porch stopped talking. Miriam stopped the cart 20 feet from him. Tolliver turned. He saw her. He saw the cart, the sick child. His eyes took in her ragged clothes, her exhaustion. A slow, profoundly ugly smile spread across his face. He saw his property, returned, beaten. "Well, Miriam," he boomed, his voice oozing a false, oily pity. "It seems you are done with your little trip. I am disappointed. You have caused me a great deal of trouble." He stepped toward her, his thumbs hooked in his waistcoat. Silas grinned beside him. "You will be punished, of course," Tolliver said, his voice hardening. "Severely, for the theft of my mule, for the loss of my man, and for your defiance. You are my property, girl, and you will learn respect." He was 5 feet from her when a new voice cut the air. "She ain't your property." Tolliver froze. Silas's grin vanished. At the far end of the street, in front of the saloon, stood Eli. He was on foot, caked in mud, breathing hard. He had led the mule south, then cut it loose and run. He had run for miles, circling back, knowing her promise was a lie. He was holding a double-barreled shotgun, and it was leveled, steady as rock, at Tolliver's chest. The street went dead silent. A crowd began to gather. Townsfolk, miners, farmers. Their faces were pinched, afraid, but they watched. Tolliver stared at Eli. He looked annoyed, not scared, just annoyed. "Eli," he said, tasting the name. "The wanted man, the killer. You have made a fatal error, son." He reached into his breast pocket. He did not pull a gun. He pulled a folded piece of paper. He held it up. "This," he said, his voice carrying to the new crowd, "is a contract, an indenture, signed by her late husband, witnessed by the court. She is mine, by the law of this territory. This woman is my property." The crowd murmured. Law was law, even rotten law. Eli did not lower the shotgun. He looked at the paper. He looked at Tolliver. He looked at Miriam, who was standing tall, her face pale but fearless. "Then the law's rotten," Eli said, his voice clear and cold. With a sudden, sharp movement, he broke the shotgun open. 2 shells popped out, landing in the mud. He tossed the empty, useless gun to the ground. He unbuckled his gun belt, the heavy Colt, and the knife in its sheath fell, splashing in the muck. He stood empty-handed. He walked slowly, deliberately, into the middle of the street, halfway between Tolliver and the saloon. He faced the judge. "You want her," Eli said, his voice echoing in the silence. "You settle it, man to man, right here." Judge Samuel Tolliver looked at the unarmed man in the mud. He looked at the shotgun Eli had thrown down, then at the gun belt lying beside it. He looked at the silent, watching faces of the townsfolk. Then he laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was a short, sharp bark of contempt, a sound that dismissed Eli as a fool, an insect. "Man to man?" Tolliver sneered. He tapped the folded contract against the thick palm of his hand. "I am a judge of this territory. You are a wanted murderer. The law does not duel with cattle. Son, it butchers them." He turned his head, his pink face impassive, toward the men beside him. "Silas, take 3 men. Seize him. I want him in chains. He will hang for Jed's murder before sundown. We will have order here." Silas, who had cowered behind the judge, found his courage. He stepped forward, drawing his pistol. 2 other men, both wearing the Hawk brand, did the same. "You heard him?" Silas said, his voice a high-pitched imitation of the judge's authority. "It is time to die. Eli." The 3 men fanned out, advancing on the lone, unarmed man in the center of the street. Eli stood his ground. His hands were open. He had come here to die. He just had to make it count. He had bought her. He hoped. A few minutes. No. The voice was not Miriam's. It was old, cracked, and full of gravel. From the porch of the saloon, a man stepped forward. He was an old miner, his clothes patched, his face a leather mask of dust and sun. He was holding a rusted double-barreled shotgun. Tolliver turned, his face darkening with annoyance. "What did you say, Eben?" "I said, no more," the miner repeated. His voice shook, but it was loud enough to carry across the street. "You took my claim. Judge, you legaled it right out from under me when I struck color. You ain't taking this man." Silas laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Sit down, Eben, before you get yourself killed. This is Judge's business. He ain't alone." This voice came from the general store. A woman in a dark apron, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, stepped out. She held a Henry rifle, and she held it like she knew how to use it. "You put my husband in the ground, Judge Tolliver," she said, her voice clear and cold. "You worked him to death on your freight line and paid him in company scrip that was worthless at his own store. You buried him in a pauper's grave." Tolliver's face began to change, the pink blotching with a deep, mottled purple. "This is insurrection," he hissed. "This is rebellion against the law." Suddenly, the street was no longer empty. The silent watchers, the ghosts in the doorways, were stepping onto the boardwalks. An old rancher, his home nothing but ash, appeared from an alley. A blacksmith, his hammer in his hand. A dozen men and women, their faces hard, their eyes full of a new, dangerous light. They were armed with farm tools, old rifles, and a shared, desperate hatred. "The law's dead. Judge," Eben the miner said, cocking his shotgun. The click-click was the loudest sound in the world. "You are looking at what is left." Tolliver, for the first time, looked afraid. He looked at Silas. "Control them! Shoot them!" Silas, caught between the armed townsfolk and the unarmed man he was sent to capture. Panicked, he raised his pistol, not at Eli, but at the crowd. "Get back! Get back! All of you!" A shot cracked the air. It was impossible to tell who fired it. It did not matter. The street exploded. It was not a battle. It was a riot. It was a pent-up flood of rage, breaking its dam. Gunfire echoed between the wooden buildings. Men yelled. Horses tied to the hitching posts screamed and tore their reins free. Miriam's first, only thought was Lydia. The cart was exposed. A bullet sang past her head, thudding into the wood. Across the street, through the smoke, she saw a small, painted sign. R.J. Finley, apothecary. A place of healing. A place of safety. She grabbed the handle of the rickety cart and pulled, yanking it through the sucking mud, running, her head down. A window on the second floor of the saloon shattered, raining glass down on her. She did not stop. The apothecary door was unlocked. She kicked it open, pushed the cart inside, and slammed it shut. The room was small, dark, and quiet, smelling of dried herbs and carbolic. Lydia was sitting up, her eyes wide with terror. "Miriam, what is happening?" "Stay here, Lydia, do not move. Whatever you hear, do not come out," Miriam commanded. She found the heavy iron bar for the door and dropped it into its brackets. "Miriam, no, do not leave me. Do not go back out there," Lydia cried, her voice thin and terrified. Miriam knelt and kissed her sister's forehead. The skin was cool. "I am not running," she said, her voice a low, fierce promise. "I am finishing this. For you, for that woman, for me." She ran back outside, emerging not onto the main street, but into the narrow alley beside the shop. The noise was deafening. Near the general store, a supply wagon was parked, its driver having fled. The woman from the store was firing her Henry rifle from the doorway, loading and firing with a grim, practiced rhythm. In the wagon bed, next to a sack of flour and a crate of tinned goods, was another rifle, a Winchester. Miriam climbed the wheel, vaulted into the bed, and grabbed it. She worked the lever, checking the action. A brass cartridge slid into the chamber. It was loaded. She was done hiding. She was done healing. She was done watching other people fight for her. She raised the rifle, the wooden stock cold and hard against her cheek, and ran toward the fight. Eli had not been unarmed for long. The moment the first shot was fired, he moved. Silas and his 2 men, distracted by the sudden uprising, had turned their backs on him. Eli dove, low and hard, tackling one of them at the knees. The man shrieked as they both went down in the churning mud. Eli did not hesitate. He was a survivor. He drove his elbow into the man's throat, a short, brutal jab. The man choked. Eli wrenched the pistol from his limp hand and rolled. He came up on one knee, armed. The second man was firing wildly into the general store. Eli fired once. The man screamed and grabbed his leg. Collapsing, Silas, seeing Eli armed and fighting, true to his nature, fled. He did not help his men. He did not defend the judge. He scrambled like a rat across the street and dove through the open door of Tolliver's office. Eli was in the open, a target for everyone. One of Tolliver's men, crouched behind a horse trough 50 feet away, saw him. The man was a professional. He did not fire into the crowd. He took his time. He rested his rifle on the trough's edge, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean. The bullet struck Eli high in the left shoulder. The impact was a physical blow, a white-hot poker that spun him completely around. A fire of pure, blinding agony ripped through him. He cried out, dropping to his knees, the pistol falling from his suddenly numb left hand. He grunted, grabbing his shoulder. His left arm was useless. The strain of the fall, of the twist, tore at his old side wound. He was bleeding from 2 places, his vision starting to gray at the edges. The man at the trough stood up. He grinned. He had him. He began to walk forward, taking his time to aim for the killing shot. "Eli!" Miriam's scream cut through the gunfire. The man with the rifle turned toward the sound. It was a fatal mistake. Crack. Miriam's shot was true. She had hunted rabbits and deer for the pot all her life. This was no different. Just meat. The man's grin vanished. He looked down, a strange, confused expression on his face, at the dark, spreading flour on his chest. He looked back up at Miriam, as if to ask a question. Then he fell backward into the water trough, his dead eyes staring at the gray sky. Eli looked up, gasping. Through the smoke, he saw her. She was standing by the wagon, not hiding, holding a Winchester, wreathed in smoke like a frontier goddess of vengeance. She had not missed. He nodded, a sharp, pained acknowledgement. He fumbled in the mud, grabbed his stolen pistol with his good right hand, and used a hitching post to haul himself to his feet. The main fight was dying. The sudden, unified rage of the townsfolk had overwhelmed Tolliver's handful of men. 2 were dead. The rest had fled, melting away into the alleys. But where was Tolliver? Eli scanned the street. The judge's fine carriage was still there, but the judge was not. Silas was hidden in the land office. Then Miriam saw him. The judge had not fled. He had relocated. He was on the porch of the saloon, dragging the terrified, balding saloon keeper out by his collar. He threw the man into the mud, ducked back inside, and the sound of a heavy bar dropping into place echoed across the street. He had barricaded himself in. "Eli!" Miriam yelled, pointing. Eli saw it. He began to limp toward the saloon, his left arm hanging useless, his face a pale mask of pained determination. But Miriam was faster. She knew the front door was suicide. She ran down the alley, the same one she had used to enter the town. She knew every building like this had a back or side door. She found it, a delivery entrance, for beer kegs and supplies. It was barred from the inside. She did not hesitate. She raised the Winchester and fired, the shot splintering the wood around the lock. She kicked the door. It burst open. She was in. The saloon was dark, the air thick with the smell of stale beer, cigar smoke, and fear. "I knew you would come." The voice boomed from the darkness. Miriam froze. At the top of the main stairs, on the landing that led to the upstairs rooms, stood Judge Tolliver. He was not panicked. He was in command. He was holding a double-barreled shotgun, and it was aimed directly at her. Miriam raised her rifle. They were in a standoff. Ah, Tolliver sneered, his voice oily and calm. "Property should not handle firearms. You have caused me so much trouble. Miriam, so much." He was cornered, a rat in a trap, but he was a very dangerous rat. "You think you have won?" He laughed, a low, rumbling sound. "You have won nothing. You have turned my town of ingrates against me. You have killed my men. And for what?" He took a step down, the shotgun never wavering. "I will walk out of here. I will go to Helena. I will bring back the marshals. I will bring back the army. They will see this, an insurrection. They will hang Eben. They will hang that woman from the store. They will hang all of them." He smiled. "And you, they will see the contract. They will see the law. You will be returned to me. You were always mine. Miriam, from the moment I saw you, you just resisted. The law's rotten," she whispered, her voice shaking but full of ice. "It does not matter," he roared, his composure finally cracking. "It is the law. You forgot something," Miriam said. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the bar. A low fire was burning in the hearth behind it, the only light in the room. "What?" Tolliver asked, his eyes narrowing. "In your office," she said, her voice clear. "When the shooting started, Silas fled, but you stopped. You went to your desk. I saw you." Tolliver's face, which had been composed, went utterly pale. Miriam took a step, not toward him, but sideways, toward the bar, the rifle still pointed at his chest. "Stop! Get back!" he commanded. "You grab your satchel." She continued, her voice gaining strength. "She was at the bar." She reached behind it. Her hand closed on a heavy leather satchel. His satchel. He must have dropped it when he ran in to barricade the door. "That is mine!" Tolliver screamed. He started down the stairs, his rage making him clumsy. Miriam opened the satchel. Inside were stacks of money, legal papers, and on top, a single, folded document. She pulled out the contract. She held it up. She saw her name. She saw Thomas's name. She saw the judge's signature, the brand, the chain. "I am not your property," she said. She walked to the fireplace. "Stop! I will shoot you! I will kill you! You witch!" he shrieked. He was on the main floor now, rushing her, his face a purple mask of insane rage. She held the paper to the flames. The corner blackened, smoked, and then it caught. A bright yellow flame licked up the page, devouring the ink. She held it as it burned, the fire reflecting in her eyes, until it was nothing but a black, crumbling piece of ash that dissolved in the heat. It was done. "You bitch!" Tolliver roared. He was 10 feet away. He had lost. The paper was gone. His proof, his legal power. All he had left was brute force. He raised the shotgun, his eyes murderous. The saloon's front doors burst open, splintering against the wall. Eli stood there, framed in the gray daylight. He was a ruin. He was covered in mud, bleeding from his side, bleeding from his shoulder. He was holding the pistol in his right hand, but it was shaking, his strength almost gone. "Eli," Miriam breathed. Tolliver turned. He saw the new threat. He saw the dying man. He saw the defiant woman. He had 2 targets. He grinned, a terrible, broken, mad grimace. He swung the heavy shotgun toward Eli. The man was the greater threat. Eli tried to raise his pistol. He was too slow. His arm was too heavy. Tolliver made his choice. He pulled both triggers, but Miriam was faster. She had never dropped her rifle. Crack. Her shot came a split second before his. Tolliver's shot went wide. The massive boom of the shotgun filled the saloon, the buckshot tearing a ragged, fist-sized hole in the doorframe, inches from Eli's head. The judge stood perfectly still. The shotgun slipped from his fingers, clattering on the wooden floor. He looked down. He looked at Miriam. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. He just looked annoyed. He fell. He hit the floor with a heavy, final thud, like a sack of wet grain. He did not move. The saloon was dead silent. The smell of sulfur and gun smoke was overpowering. Miriam let the rifle fall from her numb fingers. Eli stumbled forward, his legs giving out. He caught himself on a card table, scattering chips and glasses, and leaned there, gasping. The silence from the saloon spread to the street. The townsfolk, who had gathered at the sound of the shotgun, peered into the gloom. They saw the judge's body. They saw the blood. They saw Miriam, standing by the fire. They saw Eli, bleeding against the table. No one moved to claim the body. No one called for a sheriff. No one cried out for justice. Eben, the old miner, spat on the boardwalk. "Good riddance," he muttered. No one stopped Miriam as she walked to Eli. No one said a word as she put her arm around his waist, taking his full weight onto her small frame. No one interfered as she helped him limp out of the saloon, out of the darkness, and into the weak, gray daylight. That night, the town was quiet. It was not a fearful quiet. It was the deep, exhausted quiet of a fever that has finally, blessedly, broken. Behind the apothecary, in a small, sheltered yard walled by brick, Miriam had built a fire. Lydia was asleep in the cart, safe, warm, and breathing deeply, bundled in every blanket the apothecary owner could spare. Eli was on the ground, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. Miriam came out of the shop, holding a bowl of steaming water, clean rags, and a bottle of whiskey. She knelt in front of him. "Let me," she said. He opened his eyes. He nodded, too weak to speak. She helped him peel the ruined, bloody shirt from his torso. It was a mess. The wound in his side, the one from the fall, was an inflamed, ugly tear. The new one, the bullet hole in his shoulder, was clean through, but it was bleeding sluggishly. He hissed in a sharp breath as she poured whiskey over the shoulder wound. "You will live," she said. Her voice was soft, factual. He leaned forward, his energy gone, and rested his head in her lap. He was a heavy, solid weight, but she held him. She continued to work, her hands, which had been so steady with the rifle, now gentle, washing the grime and blood from his skin. She bandaged his shoulder, then his side. He looked up at her, his eyes clouded with pain and exhaustion. I ran, he whispered, his voice a rasp. I ran back. I know, she said. We are free, he murmured, his eyes starting to drift shut. We can go west, Idaho, just survive. Miriam stopped her work. She looked down at his face, cradled in her lap. She brushed the damp, muddy hair from his forehead. No, she said. His eyes opened, trying to focus on her. I need you to want more than surviving. He stared up at her, not understanding. Surviving is what we did, she said, her voice gaining a quiet, new strength. Surviving is hiding in caves. It is running from hounds. It is being insects. I am done surviving. Eli. She looked at the fire. I want to live. I want to build. I want to stop being afraid. He saw her face in the firelight. He saw the woman who had burned the contract, the woman who had fired the shot, the woman who had saved his life. He slowly, painfully, nodded. More, he whispered. More than surviving. She smiled. It was the first real smile he had ever seen on her face. It was not the tight, hard grimace of defiance. It was a true smile. It transformed her. She leaned down and kissed him, softly, on the lips. It was a kiss of promise, not of passion. He winced, the small movement pulling at the fresh stitches in his shoulder. A small sound escaped her. A laugh. It was a rusty, unused sound, startled out of her. He saw her laugh, and a low, pained grin touched his own mouth. They both laughed, quietly, in the dark, behind the apothecary, with the body of a tyrant growing cold just 100 feet away. Weeks bled into a month. The high, wounded country of Montana gave way to the rolling, gentler valleys of the Idaho border. They were 3 small figures in a vast, empty landscape, but they were no longer running. They were moving. Lydia was stronger. The first week, she had remained a fragile bundle on the mule. Jacob, the second week. She sat up. By the third, she was speaking, her voice thin but clear, pointing out a hawk or a strange rock formation. The herbal remedy from the Shoshone woman, combined with Miriam's fierce, stubborn nursing, had pulled her back from the edge. The hollows in her cheeks began to fill, and the waxy pallor of the fever was replaced by a faint, healthy color. Eli's wounds healed with the land's own slow, stubborn pace. His shoulder remained stiff, a permanent reminder of the price, and his old side wound was a puckered, angry scar. But he moved without the hitch, without the gray mask of pain. He walked, his rifle resting in the crook of his arm, his eyes scanning the horizon, not for trackers, but for a place. They were no longer fugitives, they were settlers. One afternoon, they passed the charred remains of the homestead where they had met the fleeing family. Miriam clutched the blue wool scarf, now tied to her saddlebag. She expected to feel the same cold despair, but the homestead was not empty. A new, rough-hewn wagon sat where the old one had rotted. The sound of a hammer, sharp and clear in the autumn air, echoed from the cabin. A man, his back to them, was fitting a new timber into the burned-out wall. A line of laundry, a child's shirt, a woman's apron, flapped in the breeze. The man stopped hammering. He had heard them. He turned, his hand dropping to a pistol on his hip. It was the same man, his face still thin, but his eyes were no longer dead. He saw Eli. He saw Miriam. He saw the mule. He did not speak. Eli raised a hand, palm out. The man stared for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. A single, sharp acknowledgement. He turned back to his work, and the sound of the hammer resumed. Building? Miriam looked at Eli. He nodded back. They moved on. But something had shifted. The ghost country was coming back to life. They found their place 3 days later. It was in a small, sheltered valley, cut deep by a creek that ran clear and cold. The cabin was set back against a wall of pine, protected from the north wind. It was small, sturdy, built of good, thick logs. But it was empty. A broken chair lay on the porch. The door hung open on one hinge. It was another home, abandoned. Another family that had fled. But this place had not been burned. It had just been left. "Here," Miriam said, her voice quiet. Eli looked at her. "It is late in the year. The winter will be hard." "It is a roof," she said. "It is a wall." It was a home. They spent the first week making it whole. Eli rehung the door, his movements economical and sure. He mended the roof, replacing the split shingles. Miriam scrubbed the floor, washing away the layers of dust and mouse droppings. Her hands, long healed from the bridge, working with a relentless energy. Lydia, sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket, sorted through a small box of rusty nails they had found, making them into neat, straight piles. On the fourth day, Miriam watched from the window as Eli went not to the wood pile, but to the small, fallow garden patch behind the cabin. It was overgrown with weeds, the soil hard and dry. He had found the broken head of a hoe and had spent the previous night fitting it with a new, hand-carved handle. He began to dig. His shoulder, the one that had taken the bullet, protested. Miriam could see him wince, see him stop and roll the joint, but he did not stop. He worked the rest of the morning, breaking the hard, dry clods of earth. He was not a gunman. He was not a runaway. He was a farmer. He came in at midday, his face streaked with sweat, his good hand calloused. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small handful of seeds. "What is it?" she asked. "Winter wheat," he said, laying them on the table. "Found it in a rotted sack in the shed. Might be no good, but it is something to plant." He was answering her, the promise he had made behind the apothecary. "I need you to want more than surviving." He was planting for a spring he was not even sure they would see. He was planting for the future. The next morning, Miriam was sweeping the cabin, a deep, satisfied rhythm to her work. She was clean. Her sister was safe. They had food, a rabbit Eli had snared, and a fire. The broom head caught on a loose floorboard near the hearth. She had swept over it a dozen times, but today, she stopped. She knelt. Her curiosity piqued. The board was not nailed down. She worked her fingers into the crack and pulled. It came up with a small groan of old wood. Underneath, in the shallow, dark space, was a small, oilskin-wrapped packet, tied with a bit T of twine. Her heart beat a little faster. It was someone's private cash. Money? She untied the twine. The oilskin was brittle, cracking in her fingers. Inside was not money. It was a letter, folded many times, the paper yellowed and soft as cloth. The ink was faded, a rusty brown, but the handwriting was clear, a woman's careful, looped script. It was dated 3 years prior. "My dearest Samuel, it is 3 weeks now since the whistle blew. 3 weeks since I saw you walk down the hill to the new shaft. Mr. Henderson was kind. He said they are still trying to reach the pocket. He said there is still hope. But the other women in camp, they do not look at me anymore. They look away. They know. The mountain does not give back what it takes. I am not strong. Samuel, you always said I was, but I am not." "Lydia," Miriam gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The same name, a strange, cold echo. "Lydia woke with the croup again last night. The air is so thin here. She misses you. She keeps asking when you will bring her the rock candy you promised. I sit here, on this porch, and I watch the trail. I watch for a man who is not coming. The ground is hard. The winter is coming. I should pack. I should take Lydia and go back east, to my sister. It is what a smart woman would do. It is what you would tell me to do. But I cannot leave the place you last laid your head. I do not know why, but I keep pushing, even when I shouldn't. Yours, always." Eliza Miriam let the letter fall into her lap. She did not sob. She did not make a sound, but a hot, silent tear rolled down her cheek. And then another, and another. She wept. She wept for Eliza. She wept for the lost Samuel. She wept for the other Lydia. She wept for the quiet, unseen, uncelebrated agonies of all the women who had ever come to this hard country and been left to wait. She wept for the woman at the burned-out homestead. She wept for herself, for the woman who had sat by a dying sister in a ruined wagon, for the property of a fat, cruel man. She wept for the simple, shared, terrible truth of that last line, "I keep pushing, even when I shouldn't." Eli found her there, sitting on the floor, the letter in her lap, her shoulders shaking. He came in quietly, smelling of the cold air and the turned earth. He saw the open floorboard. He saw the letter. He saw her tears. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not ask to read it. He just sat down on the floor beside her. He was a big man, and the cabin was small, but he did not seem to crowd her. He just sat, his solidness a comfort. After a minute, he put his good arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, her weeping quieting, and pressed her face against his rough wool shirt. He was not a man of easy words. He was not a man who knew how to comfort, but he was there. He was not in a mine shaft. He was not a ghost. He held her until the last tremor passed. She lost him," Miriam whispered, her voice thick. "In the mine, they had a little girl named Lydia." Eli's arm tightened around her. "She kept pushing," Miriam said, her voice full of a strange, pained wonder. "She just kept on." Eli was silent for a long time. He looked around the small, sturdy cabin. He looked at the mended roof. He looked at the clean floor. He looked at the woman in his arms. "We will build something they can't tear down," he said, his voice a low, rough promise. Not a mine, not a man like Tolliver. He held her, and for the first time in her life, Miriam felt deep in her bones that this was a promise that would be kept. Their intimacy deepened, but it was not the frantic, desperate coupling of the cave, or the tender, healing touch after the battle. It was a new thing. It was quiet. It was domestic. It was in the shared meals, Eli and Miriam sitting across from each other at the small, rough-hewn table, Lydia between them, eating a stew made from the rabbit Eli had caught. It was in the evenings. Eli would sit by the fire, sharpening his knife, not for a fight, but to whittle. He was terrible at it. He tried to carve a bird for Lydia, but it ended up looking like a lumpy potato. Lydia laughed, a real, bright sound that startled all of them. And Eli grinned, his face softening in a way Miriam had never seen. It was in the afternoons, when he would take Lydia outside. He lifted her onto the mule's broad, placid back. At first, she clung to his neck, afraid, but he held her. He walked the mule in slow, patient circles around the cabin. "You are all right," he murmured. "I got you." The same words he had said to Miriam as she dangled over the ravine. Miriam watched them from the porch, her heart a tight, aching knot in her chest. This was what building looked like. One cold, bright morning, when the first frost lay like a layer of sugar on the ground. The final test arrived. He came from the east, a single rider. He was not a drifter, and he was not a bounty hunter. He wore a heavy coat, and the badge on it was a dull, silver star. He rode a strong, confident horse, and he stopped a polite 20 yards from the cabin. Eli, who had been splitting wood, did not stop. He just rested his axe and watched. Miriam came out onto the porch. "Mornin'," the man called. He was older, his face weathered, his eyes a pale, piercing blue. "Looking for a place to rest my horse. Name is Marshal Davies. You are a long way from your territory, Marshal." Eli said. He did not move from the woodpile. "My territory is where the law sends me." Davies said. He dismounted, never taking his eyes off Eli. I was in Bitterbrush Crossing, verifying the death of Judge Samuel Tolliver. Seems the whole town fell into a state of confusion, a riot. Judge got killed in the crossfire. "Seems that way," Eli said. The marshal walked closer. He looked at Miriam. He looked at Lydia, who was peeking from behind Miriam's skirts. Then his eyes settled on Eli. He looked at him for a long, cold 10 seconds. "You are a hard man to find," Davies said, his voice dropping. "Eli, known associate of the Stark Syndicate, wanted for murder, 3 counts, in Miles City." Miriam's breath caught. It was not over. "I have a warrant for you," the marshal said. He reached into his coat. Been carrying it for 6 months. Eli tensed, his hand moving toward the axe. "But," the marshal said, his voice reasonable, "I am also a pragmatic man. I read the affidavits in Bitterbrush. I know what Tolliver was. I know what Stark is. Seems to me this territory is better off without both of them. And that riot, it saved me a lot of trouble. The paperwork would have been extensive." He stepped closer. "So here's the way of it. I am here about Tolliver. My report will say he is dead, and the town is quiet. As for the warrant for Eli," he looked Eli in the eye, "I lost a few men, tracking a bounty hunter up near a ravine. A whole bridge was washed out. Man must have fallen, body never recovered." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I ride out of here. I am riding out alone. My report will say Eli is dead, lost to the river. The warrant is closed, but you have to be dead. You cannot be in Idaho. You cannot be anywhere." He looked at Miriam. "He disappears, forever. You and the girl, you are free. No one will ever connect you to this. But if he stays, I have to take him in. I am the law, son. I can bend it, but I cannot break it." He turned. "I will water my horse at the creek. I will be back in 1 hour. You decide." He walked away. Miriam looked at Eli. He was pale, his face a mask of his old, haunted self, the runner, the survivor. That night, in the cabin, he did not meet her eyes. He was packing. He rolled his whetstone and his knife into his bedroll. He took the last of the jerky. He was the shadow in the storm again. "Eli," she said, her voice shaking. "He is right," Eli said, his voice dead. "It is the only way. I am what I am. I am wanted. If I stay, I will just drag you down. I will drag you to Helena, to a courtroom. You will have to talk about Tolliver, about everything. You will be the killer's woman. He will report me dead." He continued, his back to her. "You will be a widow. You and Lydia. You will be safe. You can build." "You are a fool," she whispered. He stopped, his hand tightening on the bedroll. "A damned noble fool," she said, her voice rising, the old fire returning. "He is offering you what you have always done, to run, to disappear, to be a ghost. He is offering you survival." She walked up to him, grabbed his arm, and spun him around. "And I told you," she said, her eyes blazing into his. "I am done with surviving. We are building, you and me. You do not get to leave. You do not get to run. That is the old way. Miriam, he will take me. He is the law." "Then let him," she spat. "Let him take you, and I will follow him. I will follow him to Helena. I will stand up in his courtroom, in front of his judge, and I will tell the truth. I will tell them about a man named Eli who pushed my wagon out of the mud, who built a bridge with his bare hands, who saved my sister's life, who came back for me, who killed a man to protect me, and who stood up, unarmed, to a tyrant." She poked him in the chest. "I am not afraid of his law. Eli, I am not afraid of him." "Are you?" He stared at her, his whole world tilting. He had been running for so long. He had forgotten how to stand still. She was offering him a place, a fight, a home. He let the bedroll drop from his hand. When the marshal returned, his horse watered. Eli and Miriam were waiting on the porch, together. "Marshal," Miriam said, her voice clear and strong. Eli stood beside her, his hand on her waist. He was not running. "He is not leaving," Miriam said. The marshal sighed, his face weary. "Ma'am, do not make this. And you are not taking him," she continued. "You are not taking him, because I am going to tell you the truth, and you, as a man of the law, are going to listen, she told him. She told him everything. She started with the bruise on her wrist, the branded ring. She told him about the contract, the flight, the storm. She told him about Silas and the fight in the cave. She told him about the burned-out homestead. She told him about the battle in the street and the contract she burned in the fire. She spoke for a long time. The marshal did not interrupt. He just listened. When she was finished, the clearing was silent. The marshal looked at his boots. He looked at the sky. He looked at the warrant in his hand. "That is a hell of a story, ma'am," he said. "It is the truth," she said. Before he could answer, 2 more riders appeared on the trail. It was Eben, the miner, and the woman from the Bitterbrush General Store. They rode up, their horses tired. "Marshal," Eben said, tipping his hat, "heard you was headed this way after we settled things in Bitterbrush. We sent a wire to a friend in Miles City. A telegraph operator asked him to look into the Stark warrant." The woman pulled a piece of folded paper from her coat. "The wire came back this morning. Seems Mr. Stark's whole syndicate is being investigated by the railroad. Seems that murder Eli was wanted for." The main witness recanted his story last week, said he was paid by Stark to lie, said Stark's own men did the shooting. The warrant, it is based on a false report. She handed the telegraph message to the marshal. Davies read it. His face was like stone. He read it again. He looked at the official warrant in his other hand. He looked at the telegraph message. He looked at Miriam's defiant face. He looked at Eli, who was standing, solid as a rock, his arm around his woman. The marshal let out a long, slow breath. He spat in the dust. "Stark," he muttered. "Rotten as Tolliver, the whole damn territory." He took the warrant for Eli. He tore it in half, then in quarters, and let the pieces fall to the cold ground. "My report," he said, his voice flat and official, "will state that the matter of Judge Tolliver is closed, and the warrant for Eli appears to have been issued on false pretenses. The case is dismissed." He looked at Eli. "You are a free man. Though I would not go back to Miles City if I were you." "I am not," Eli said, his voice rough. "I am home." The marshal nodded. "Good day to you. Ma'am, sir." He tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode away. They were married a week later. The first snow of the season was falling. Small, delicate flakes that melted on the porch. An itinerant preacher, his face red with cold, stood before them. Eben and the store owner, whose name was Martha, stood as witnesses. Miriam wore her mended blue dress and the wool scarf. Eli was in a clean shirt. Lydia, standing straight and tall on her own, held a small, brave bunch of yellow wildflowers she had found near the creek. The preacher's words were simple, lost almost in the vast, quiet cold. "And do you, Miriam, take this man, to have and to hold?" "I do," she said, her voice clear, never taking her eyes from his. "And do you, Eli, take this woman?" Eli's throat was tight. He looked at this small, fierce woman who had saved him from himself. "I do," he said, his voice a rasp. Lydia sniffed, a small, happy sob, and wiped her eyes. Eli took the ring, a simple, thin gold band, bought from Martha's store. His hand, the hand that had held a gun, that had pulled a knife, that had held her dangling over a canyon. It trembled. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was not a brand. It was not a chain. It was a circle, a choice. It was a promise. That night, the snow had stopped. The world was clean, white, and absolutely silent, covered by a vast, cold blanket of stars. Lydia was asleep in her cot, warm by the fire. Eli and Miriam sat on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. He was solid. He was real. He was not leaving. She leaned her head on his shoulder. The war was over. The running was done. This was the first day of their lives. She whispered, her voice so quiet it was just breath, a breath that turned to steam in the cold. "Keep pushing." He turned his head. His lips brushed her hair. He was not the shadow she had met in the storm. He was not the haunted survivor. He was just her husband. He grinned, a real slow, happy grin that lit his eyes in the starlight. I ain't letting go. Thank you for listening to our story. Let us know where you are tuning in from in the comments to connect with fellow listeners. And be sure to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.